Technology is growing and it's beautiful and it's a super tool. I think the bottleneck is the decision-making piece to it.
What if the problem is not that we can't see the future, but that we don't know how to act when we already see that future?
We live in a time of hyper-convergence. There's a lot of things happening that stack to each other. Think of like compound interest, right? If you just have something simple, it might look small, but as time progresses, that growth is exponential.
70% of all transformation initiatives fail. And even when companies start investing heavily in the strategy, in talent and execution. So I don't think it's about lack of awareness, but it's something that is breaking between the intention and the outcome.
In the current environment, and taking AI as an example, things are moving faster than what our hardware is used to seeing, right? Our hardware tends to think linearly, not exponentially.
During the past year, people have asked me in different ways a version of the very same question. Can we actually see the future? And I think that many leaders will instinctively say yes, at least we like to believe we can, but I've started to wonder if that's actually the right question. Because when you look at the world right now, it's not that the future is invisible, it is unusually visible. An example of this is AI, which is already generating a meaningful share of the world's code, in some environments approaching to half of it. It is projected to add 13 to 15 trillion to the global economy while reshaping hundreds of millions of jobs. Adoption cycles that once took decades are now unfolding in months. Capabilities that used to belong to institutions are increasingly accessible to individuals. So the signal is there. And yet, when you look across companies, governments, and institutions, you see a pattern that it's hard to ignore. Leaders are acknowledging disruption, but very few feel ready to act on it, which raises a more uncomfortable possibility. What if the problem is not that we can't see the future, but that we don't know how to act when we already see that future? And that gap between seeing and acting is where the things start to break. Because we've seen this dynamic before. Companies are missing signals, and the signals were there, they were internal, the capability was there, and still the system couldn't move. And what is interesting is that it doesn't seem to be a failure of intelligence or even a failure of strategy. Organizations today invest millions in forecasting, in planning, and a scenario analysis. They hire talent, build innovation units, track signals very obsessively, and still the outcome doesn't change. So maybe the real constraint sits somewhere else, in incentives, in power, in how decisions are made, in how systems are designed to preserve stability, in a world where nothing is necessarily longer stable. And if that is true, then this stops being a question about the future, and it becomes a question about leadership. Because if you are running a company, sitting on a board, shaping a strategy, or making decisions in environments where the pace of change is accelerating, this is not theoretical anymore. This is operational. And it shows up in how fast you move, what you prioritize, what you delay, and more specifically, whether you act on time.
I am Diana Daniels. I am the host of this podcast. I am in the intersection of technology, telecommunications, AI, blockchain, and we go beyond trends to understand the deeper shifts shaping the future of business and society.
So today's conversation is really about that tension. Why do systems fail to act on the future that they are already seeing, and what would it take to redesign them? Today, joining the Tech Foresight podcast is Ricardo Rosselló. If you are from Puerto Rico, most likely you have heard of him. And if you're not, well, Ricardo is a scientist, he's an entrepreneur. Yes, he's the former governor of Puerto Rico, but mainly he is someone who has operated inside systems where decisions carry real consequences. And through that experience, he's developed a concept that captured this perfectly in his book, The Reformer's Dilemma. The idea that knowing what needs to change doesn't mean you can actually make it happen. So today, we're going to explore why systems fail to act on the future that we already see and what it will take to redesign them so they can. Let's get into it.
Ricardo, welcome to the Tech Foresight podcast. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you, Diana. It's a pleasure to be here with you and excited to talk about the future with you.
You have a very unique journey, starting from your scientific background, working then in very complex systems, and then stepping into leadership roles where decisions are beyond theoretical, and they actually have like real consequences. And what I found particularly interesting about your perspective is that you've seen the future from both sides, from the lens of scientific as you are, and also where the patterns and the signals are very clear. And then also from inside systems where acting on those signals become much more complex. So I would like us to frame us from here. And it's not just kind of like what it is. You know, I believe that what we can talk is about like what is happening. So if you look at what is happening right now, for instance, on AI, where 5% of the global code is already being generated by AI, and where some environments, that number probably might be even higher. Even some industries, is getting difficult for them to understand what even to do with AI. So in my way, or my way of thinking, there's a gap. There's a gap that sometimes is not consistent, where leaders acknowledge where disruption should be and where the implementation it is. How do you interpret this gap, Ricardo? What do you think that is happening between seeing those signals and then feeling unprepared that so many leaders actually might feel sometimes?
Well, I certainly see the gap, and I concur. I think we live in a time, the way I define it, Diana, is we live in a time of hyper-convergence. There's a lot of things happening that stack to each other. Think of like compound interest, right? If you just have something simple, it might look small, but as time progresses, that growth is exponential. And perhaps putting my scientist hat on this first, you know, I was able to experience, when I started as a scientist, the idea of the solo scientist, right? The idea of the individual that was working on a project and doing all the work and then publishing and so forth. By the end of it, that solo scientist was close to being extinct, because the technologies and the platforms and the things that evolved, allowed me to do things that I couldn't do at the beginning of the journey. I could be talking with my collaborators in China or, in Europe instantaneously with graphs in a computer where I couldn't at the beginning. Now, to that point, different sectors of society have different traditional paces.
Yeah.
Obviously, high-tech industry moves quickly, as quick as can be. That probably is the leading edge. But as governor, I saw quite the opposite side of things, which is government tends to be slower in that respect. And I don't mean it as a critique. Sometimes it's necessary to kind of pull the brakes when things are going too fast. But superimpose that into now, Diana, and with AI, with biotech, with space moving forward, quantum computing, energy, all of these industries are stacking into each other, and the properties that emerge are unique, sometimes hard to predict, and they are evolving very quickly. So decision making becomes a premium, right? The way I saw it, and I will condense it now, is that maybe 30 years ago, information was a premium. It was scarce. Now we're at the opposite end of the spectrum, and how we handle all of that information, how we react quickly, and how we make those decisions will be the difference from us, succumbing over the pressure of all of these technologies and changes in society, or helping it push it forward to beautiful futures.
You know what? The way that I see this is that sometimes, because when you look on how disruption plays out, I believe that there's a recurring pattern. I know that in the past we have spoken a lot about like what Kodak built digital photography, that they never scale it up, right? Nokia led the mobile market, and they still lost that smartphone transition in just a few years. And I guess that in both cases, the signal was already inside the organization. And I guess that sometimes, the leaders and the people that are inside of those organizations, we see a pattern or a behavior that we keep repeating. So what do you think with those lenses that you have that are very unique? What do organizations consistently do wrong, even when they already understand that direction where the things are going?
So great question. I think it varies, but it goes under this following framework. I've called it the perverse incentive framework, Diana. And the idea is, a lot of us have like virtuous ideas of virtuous goals individually or in the company level, right? Kodak, for example, wanted to provide these memories for the people to have these pictures, and then it became a business. As things were changing, their KPIs and their underlying incentives were so embedded into their DNA that they could not pull away from them, right? They felt that it was an inherent part on the one side, and on the other side, I think we have blind spots, and sometimes those incentives are embedded there. So I think that if we're to look at those, all of us have them, right? All of us. I always use one of my examples is when I was in office, I wanted to demonstrate that my administration was an administration that was coming to work. So I woke up before everybody else, and I went to sleep after everybody else. I turned on the lights; everybody could see it, and it was a good indicator at the beginning. But towards the tail end, the product was that I wasn't sleeping as well, right? So it had a perverse effect on me, and I couldn't see it. It was a blind spot for me. So the way I see it is, and we can dive in deeper, is in order to address these perverse incentives, whether individual or systemically on a corporation, you need to look at the hardware problem first, which I call our biological inclinations, right? There are things hardwired into us that make us act a certain way, how we react to fear, how we react to urgency, how we react to negativity, and so forth. And understand that that's being hacked all the time. Number two, how do we update the software? And that's where a lot of these things come in, right? How do you see what's happening in the environment and say, well, now it's time to adjust and adjust quickly. And the last one that I add towards this, and it goes with the first element of science that I spoke about, is this idea of cloudware. Now we're interconnected everywhere. Now relationships are at a premium as opposed to the soloist. And how do we leverage all of these things in order to move it forward? In the current environment, and taking AI as an example, things are moving faster than what our hardware is used to seeing, right? Our hardware tends to think linearly, not exponentially. And so we need to adjust our software to make sure that it adjusts to that long-term hardware limitation, so that we can keep up with AI. Because otherwise, we're always just going to be in the back end as this continues, and we're going to be lagging as opposed to leading.
I love it, because in most of the conversations that I have had with other leaders as well that are either implementing or were implementing digital transformation, now are implementing AI transformation, we always speak about this crazy number, like 70% of all transformation initiatives fail. And even when companies start investing heavily in the strategy, in talent and execution. So I don't think it's about lack of awareness, but it's something that is breaking between the intention and the outcome. So I know you wrote a book, The Reformer's Dilemma, and for those that didn't have the opportunity to do it, is it something that you describe in there where is getting, is actually happening in that gap between knowing what needs to change and not being able to make it happen? Because as you said, in some organizations, things are slower, or they're so heavily with the way that they used to do the work that it's not necessarily sometimes in the willing of the people to do it, but then into making it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I'm going to skip from technological and science to very human nature elements, right? I think that my main observation is that reform and change, while beautiful and romantic in nature and transformation, right? It's the analogous. It is littered with obstacles and with challenges and with oppositions. So I set out in that book to try to figure out what are some of these obstacles and oppositions. And the one of the biggest elements that I did see during this effort was the aggregate nature of opposition, right? Once you do one change, you're going to have some opponents that are going for that change, so that when you go for the second change, you not only have the new opponents, you have the old opponents as well. That's number one. Number two, we have to be mindful that everything that's set up, a system that's set up, somebody's winning in that system, right? So whenever you change that system, that person stands to lose, or that group of people stands to lose. And my experience in office is that while let's assume the best case scenario, that you're making a change that's in the benefit of 95% of the people, but there's 5% of the people that are benefiting from the current status quo, you will receive the timid support of the 95%, but you will receive the ferocious opposition from those that stand to change. So inherently, when you come to change, whether it's the government or even in a company, right? I'll give you a short story example. Healthcare, right? There's so many innovations going on healthcare, Diana. But when you go to the practical aspect of going to the medical doctor, sometimes even simple changes that can make a big difference do not get implemented. And the reason is that there are already medical professionals that, for example, have been working on 20 years on a procedure. They have become the experts on the field on doing something for cancer or for neuroscience. And something comes up that completely changes that, they will resist that change because their identity is already set up on the old way of doing things, and then they will oppose it. So we need to be mindful that no matter how good the setup is for most of the people, there's always going to be some people that will be affected by it, and their livelihood might depend on it, and they will oppose it with every inch of their body, so that that resistance will always be there.
It's very interesting because then you have time. CEOs, their tenure is between 5 to 7 years. In office, you also have limited time to make things happen, right? And to make sure that they fully materialize. And the truth is that those meaningful transformations, they don't take 4 years or even 5. It sometimes even take 10 years to truly materialize.
That's right.
How much of this dilemma is also really driven by these incentives that you're speaking about? While leaders are constrained, not what they see, but also what the system can allow them to create, and then this set of rewards that people have also in making those changes happen.
Yeah, well, it depends on what your motivation is, right? And I think this is where it stems. Let's take two different people for example. If your motivation is power and staying in power, then you are likely going to skip the longer term transformations for the shorter term gains, so that you could sustain that power, right? Even though in the aggregate it's not beneficial. If on the other side your main objective is to make transformation, then you're likely sabotaging your stay in power in order to achieve those. You are likely not going to see those changes in your lifetime. I mean, I have a very personal story here. You know, when I was in office, I brought about a few reforms, but I want to highlight two of them. One was the energy reform in Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
Energy reform at the scale that we wanted to make it was going to take 8 to 10 years. So I was really sure I was never going to see the benefit of it. But it was something that was so embedded into what I wanted to do and what was my identity. I could not bear to watch an old, 1950s energy grid sustain and people hurt. Now, the transition hurts because you have to take it down before you put it up. But the aspiration is like you will follow through the pain, and then in the end, next generation will benefit from it, right? Similar in education. Education, you can make changes today, but when you really see the effect of it is in a generation. You know, when those kids that are coming up see those changes. So it's better to build a building that you can have done in 2 years and point to it and say, I built that, than to for the sustainment of power, than to have longer term aspirations. And I think those were two extremes, but I think the best way to try to do it is to have a balance, right? And have a sequence. In my book, I speak of a strategy for reform, which is sequencing. In essence, reducing it is how do you create an environment where you can have small wins that propel your longer term vision, right? So how do you strike with blitzkrieg on small things like tax reform or permits reform or building a building that people say, okay, now I trust this person, they have shown me that they can do. And then when I come and say, now I want to make full blast education reform, they say, all right, let's allow it because he already or she already has a track record. So that's kind of a little bit of the balance that you have to make, but it's not as easy or as trivial as it sounds.
It's interesting because in organizations, it's obviously less democratic. You don't have like a public vote of all workers voting for you to stay in the seat or not. Usually it could come up like from board members where we think like if this dilemma is more structural, then the next question is not only why it happens, but actually who gets to decide what's going to happen next. And it's not necessarily all the time a solo decision, because in most organizations, decision, they don't happen like in a vacuum. They are shaped by boards, the stakeholders, even political dynamics that are inside of the organization. And in many cases, even if a CEO sees a clear direction, they're still operating within these constraints where they are not fully in control. So I'm pretty sure that people in our audience, my field is like, yes, I know what I need to do. I understand, where I need to what it needs to happen. But then the system, it doesn't allow me. They kind of see, they pick up the signals, and sometimes they're still in that seat where they probably cannot completely execute. What will be your if you could go back in time and advise yourself in that moment, or if you could see somebody that is reminding to yourself in a situation where that, what do you think that they need to do in order to move that impasse situation?
So it's a great question, and I've wrestled with it many times. I would have several advice for me in that respect, and I was luckily I've been able to implement them on my private sector when I've been CEO on the private sector as well. The first one, which I underestimated when I was in office, was the value of relationships. Relationships are key and fundamental, because when you get stuck, you reach for those connections. You reach out for that human element to try to portray and to connect your energy, your vision, what you want to do in that front. When you don't have that, quite the opposite happens, right? Sometimes, and I had this happen when I was in office. I think I had a vision and an idea that was shared by others, but because I wasn't connected at a human level with them, they did not, they didn't want to go at the pace that I was going. So that's one thing that I would say. Relationships are king, particularly in this high tech, hyper-convergent world. I would say that more than ever, that human element of relationships is important. Might seem counterintuitive, and again, I'm only speaking from experience because I didn't, I didn't value them as I should have. The other element is understanding that this is an orchestra is the element I would use, right? As opposed to a solo act. When you have a single violinist singing, they can go at their pace, they can do what they want, they can be creative, they can to amuse the audience. Any mistake that they make is on their own, right? But when you think about the systems that are moving now, they're really orchestras. They're really a group of violinists, a group of trombonists, a group of singers, and in order for that to work, I think the leader needs to take the role more than kind of the controller of what happens, but the designer of the idea, and then making sure that things are moving in concert with each other. So what does that mean sometimes for type A personalities? It means that you have to understand that not everybody moves at the same pace. It means that you might need to dedicate a little bit of practice to some groups, while to others it requires it's more natural. But the audience, when they see the out product, they don't see this back end effort, right? They just see the music that flows from the orchestra. So it behooves the modern leader to make sure that they know who they're working on, both below them and above them in the board level. I think it's the same. It's the same element, and see how they can make it so that it works more as an orchestra as opposed to a solo act.
You know what? It's very interesting because these layers of the very human system that we are, in many cases, the cost of being wrong, and especially of being wrong early, is very visible, right? And then the cost of being wrong late is kind of like disappears, or is not as bad, but it's seen, but it's worse on systematic change. And then what also I see that is happening today is that the systems or the companies are struggling to adapt under this pressure, because everything is happening so fast that is accelerating crazy, because the way that I see it, like if we don't see it sometimes changing fast, then what it could probably unfold over months right now is unfolding like in hours, sometimes even minutes, driven by this digital amplification that in real time that is just happening. So if you're looking forward, what do you think that we are entering in this world where systems failures become faster and more frequent? And do you think that our institutions are going to be prepared for that speed? And if your answer is on the negative side of what they need to do to be prepared?
Well, I think, first of all, to the seat of the question, I think that technology is growing and it's beautiful and it's a super tool. I think the bottleneck is the decision-making piece to this, right? It's how do we make these things exponentially more powerful as opposed to exponentially more detrimental? Again, if we have the analogy I tend to say is like, we typically think that having horsepower, right? If you have a lot of horsepower, it's better. And yes, it's better if it's going in the right direction. But if you're heading off a cliff, it's worse to have a lot of horsepower, right? Because so we need to first step back for a second, understand that now things are going at a pace that we're not accustomed to. And I will put my biologist hat again for a second, and the hardware piece of it. Look, Diana, our ancestors, we are the product of ancestors that thought linearly because that's all you had to do. Not a lot of things changed in the intertwine. When something did change, our immediate response was fear and negativity, right? And so how do we adjust that? How do we recognize that that is an embedded hardware that we have, and complement it with software habits, whether it's reading, whether it's understanding, whether it's how do we complement it with habits so that these fast changes don't overwhelm our primitive parts of the brain, right? Because what happens right now is, again, you put in AI, and the fear part of the brain kicks in. It's like, oh, I don't understand this. Oh my God, they're going to take our jobs away. Oh my God, this AI is going to become this all-encompassing controlling thing. And then that puts us stuck in a place. Whereas if we're able to step back and say, all right, this is something that we're developing. What can we foresee are the changes, and how can those changes be better for humanity, right? And then you start approaching it from that perspective. I think it lies in identifying that naturally, given the circumstance of the fast pace of change, we are bound to react in a negative fashion. But if we stop and kind of like observe the observer, right? If we have the mental complexity of not only thinking as we've always thought of things, but saying like, all right, let's explore these other systems, let's explore these other modes of systems, then we could leverage those advantages as opposed to letting us overwhelm. And what we're seeing right now, in my view, is that people that have the mental complexity to balance all of these things, to see them for what they are, to understand that they're probably faster than what we're used to, but they embed that into their analysis. Those are the ones that are bound to see the opportunities, to be successful, to have some failure because it's inherent in all the process. But as you mentioned, change is occurring so fast that you can fail a few times and you'll be on the success route pretty quickly too, because the opportunities will be emerging. I think those are the folks that are, and the companies and the institutions that will succeed. Whereas those that kind of hunker down on the fear and on the uncertainty and on the linear thinking, those are bound to lag behind.
It's interesting too, because and one of the things that I'm keeping from our conversation is try to identify also those blind spots, right? That you've been telling us on how this, and then I want us to go a little bit further into the future, where we are, let's say, 5 to 10 years, and then we're putting all this pressure in the systems that is not only coming from technology, as you said, it's also coming from things that in theory should be more predictable. And I was reading the other day that by 2050, 1 in 6 people globally will be over the age of 65. Yeah. And like on previous generations, many of them will live longer and expect to live healthier and obviously more active lives. So we're just not extending the lifespan, but also the health span. So we are redefining what is going, this new age is going to look like. And that raises other and different type of questions. What is happening also with your scientist hats? What happens when science starts moving faster than those systems that were, in theory, designed to support it?
Yeah, great question. And I think this is one of the bigger challenges that we have, and it goes again to the human element. I think we are fast approaching a moment where some of the challenges we have are global in nature and require a global integrated response. I'll give 2 examples. Biology is emerging really quickly. and that's good. I mean, that's good for healthcare. That's good for tackling diseases. That's good for extending our life and quality of life. But there's also challenges, and there's also real big downsides. So how do you, on a global level, patrol something that, in order to make like a complex virus, in the past, you needed a lot of infrastructure. Now you don't need such an infrastructure. Now it can be done, by high school students. How do you
We saw this. We saw this. I don't know if you saw the news what's it, like 2 weeks ago or a month ago, where this guy created the vaccine, an mRNA vaccine for his dog with the help of ChatGPT. And
Yeah.
like, how long?
Yeah, with ChatGPT, and then you have the biological instruments that you have to make this happen. You can buy them for a couple $100, right? Before it used to be millions of dollars in order to proceed this. So literally, I mean, I say this half jokingly, but my thesis took me like 4 years to make, and I'm pretty sure that a high schooler could make it in 2 weeks now, right? Because it's that change, and it's beautiful. But it also has a downside. It's kind of like, I mean, I don't want to sound too alarmist, but it's kind of the promise of nuclear energy as well, right? It has the beautiful side of it where we could have really cheap, really clean energy, but you can also make a bomb with it, right? So globally, we now have to think about, okay, how do we advance all of these beautiful things and this knowledge and these tools for our humanity without making a small mistake that could cause a lot of lives, right? Or could set us back significantly. Similarly with artificial intelligence, right? How do you create artificial intelligence in a way that is protective of humanity and humanity's goals, as opposed to disruptive or has the wrong incentive model? So and the big challenge here, is I don't think in the past the world was prepared for this global type of infrastructure. I mean, we've tried with the United Nations and so forth, but it hasn't been successful, right? But in the future, what I see, in order for this to happen, there needs to be some sort of global collaborative effort, so that one country or one place doesn't go rogue and say, oh yeah, kids can make virus in their in their garage if they want to, and then that spreads globally, right? That affects all of us. There needs to be something globally in order. Now I don't know what that framework is, but my sense is that as all of these things starts emerging, there needs to be a little bit of a more global approach to working with these challenges, while promoting the benefit of these inventions.
So let me probably pressure a little bit here, because if we step back and then connect all of this, where we talk about foresight, about systems that are struggling to act, maybe, like about how the decisions are either shaped by power, or how failure is becoming faster and more unpredictable, just as success is becoming also faster and unpredictable, and then how we are entering into domains where the future is even arriving before than the systems that are, supporting that future already. So let me ask you this more personally. Knowing what you know today, and having experiencing, both the limits of foresight and the limits of the systems, if you could redesign those systems for the ground up from scratch, what would you change to make them more capable for, or acting in the way that people are not just reacting to it, but actually really designing the future?
So
what have you done differently?
Yeah, I think you said it. The key word you said is foresight, and I've implemented this to a lesser extent. I think we need to be more forceful now. When I was both in government and when I've been CEO of my companies, like I've in the companies, I've had always a strategic foresight group, not big, that's respectful, that has their core work, but that their real challenges start addressing and moving forward and seeing what the invisible dots that are ahead are there, right? the real balance again is human. People that are working the day to day see some of these guys sometimes and go like, oh, they're not doing anything. They're estimating, and they will make mistakes, right? But just the fact that you have some people thinking about this is very valuable. I love how it works in Great Britain. I love how it works in Singapore. So I implemented this. Now, how do you make, your question is, how do you make this as part of a DNA within the system, right?
Yes.
And so I think that with laws and regulations and even with company policy, what I would do is I'm going to lean more on people. I'm going to lean more on the people that will be working the foresight. And let's say in regulatory firms, instead, let's take the FDA, for example. Instead of just saying like, this is not allowed, this is allowed, this needs to pass, I would have a group of experts that are continuously being evaluating this, that are working. I mean, what that group composition is, we can define. But if you give it to people that are qualified to do this, they will stand to be more quick to react on the beneficial side of things than if it's a structural change every time something happens. Because, Diana, again, my grandfather lived in a time where no changes happened in 30 years. You and I lived in a time where changes happened every few years. But now we're living in a time where change happens weekly and maybe even like drastic things. So how can you make fundamental structural change and expect to be at the pace of technology and change? I think what you have to do is you have to embed in the DNA that there's going to be some people, a group of people that will lead this effort and that will have the know-how and flexibility to do so. Of course, it'll fail because people fail, but it'll also succeed and it'll also keep pace towards the changes. Whereas if you keep it rigid, I have a hard time seeing how with quantum computing, with AI, with all of these changes affecting our society, age, and so forth on a day-to-day basis, how they will stand to keep up.
I believe that is very, very powerful, Ricardo, because what it really highlights is that that the challenge is not just about seeing the future, but it's building the system that is capable to move with it. And as you said, we cannot be rigid. The world is not in concrete only. It's the fluid, especially we live in a very fluid momentum where we need to learn how to shift from where we're all facing right now, from predicting what is coming, also to redesigning how we're going to respond to it.
I want to make one more comment on this because it's very important. We always talk about intelligence and IQ is an important thing, right? Just like emotional intelligence. But there's another concept I would like to leave our listeners with, which is mental complexity. It might be related a little bit to IQ, but it's independent as well. And the idea behind mental complexity is that you are capable of there's several levels. People can look for them, Keegan's levels. And the highest level is the fifth level, where you are able to master and understand your system, but are also capable of seeing and observing other systems and how they interact. In a world, Diana, where complexity is rising by the second, I think that a premium is that we as individuals dedicate time in our personal growth to becoming more adept to being meant to have mental complexity, because otherwise we won't be able to see what comes along. In the past, successful people would probably be on a level 3 or 4 because they understood something specifically. And if somebody came with something else, they would be like, no, that doesn't work. I know this, and this is the only thing that go. And it might work for some things, right? But again, globally, we need to understand that there's these things emerging and surfacing where today you might be on top of things. tomorrow you won't be. And having mental complexity will allow you to have the capability to adjust in a way that you can you can roll with the punches of technology and exponential growth.
I love it because it's actually the perfect moment for us to zoom out a little bit, because in what we do in every episode, we ask our guests to help us to do two things. First is to identify and pick up those signals that we are seeing. And then second, share the future that in this case you would like to help shape. And we call this the 4 trends and the 4 dreams segment. And I will ask you for these 4 trends, where the things that you're going to think that are already happening that we should be paying attention to. Yeah. And then the 4 dreams, as I said, is like, how do you want that future to be? We're going to position yourself at 2050. Are you ready to do this with us?
Absolutely. I'm super excited.
Okay. The 4 trends. Yes.
Okay, I think a first trend that's very connected to where I'm to my area of expertise in biotechnology is that we are moving from a trial and error a framework to a design discovery framework. And what I mean about this is that we've been in the past, in order to prove something, say a medicine, we would have to have these large clinical trials, very expensive. And population-based analysis is the best analysis that we have. I think we're going to be in a future, Diana, where we're going to be able to model this much more effectively than doing it on even humans. And that's just one segment of society, but extrapolate that into everything. All this trial and error that has brought humanity into this point is going to go to a second place with the design discovery piece. So I think that trial and error to design discovery is one of the key elements that will be working. I think go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you. Okay, that's our trend number 1. Our trend number 2.
Trend number 2. I would say that work is being decoupled from human presence. Okay, and there's a few elements over here that I think are hyper-convergent. Artificial intelligence, the robots connected to the artificial intelligence, and then the element of cloud, right? Because you have this element of cloud, you could be remote, you could be wherever you want. You don't have to be present. And now again, adding the element of robots, you could have physical activity being done as opposed to just this virtual conversation, but physical activity being done. So work will be decoupled. I don't think, some people say work will disappear. I don't see it that way. I see it that it will be decoupled from the human presence, and it will be enabled by other actors. I think a third one is that and I'm very excited. Might be a little bit longer term on this one. But we're thinking 2050, right?
No. This is trend. This is picking up what is happening right now. This is okay. Let's not keep that one for your dream. So then, your trend number 3. What do you think? We spoke already, about the human, and then the human position at work right now that is happening already. Your trend number 1 was more about like the moving from trial and error to design and experimentation. I love this. I wish some governmental officials were doing more this than the trial and error thing. But then number 3, what do you think is your trend number 3?
So trend number 3 again, this element of trust that's so important, so part of our human nature. I think there's happening a digitalization of trust, and I'm gonna explain it over here. I think with finance, with AI, and with blockchain, a lot of the things that we used to delegate to either banks or to states, and we just had to quote unquote trust by faith. The digitalization gives us a framework where we can actually see that trust, where it's like embedded into the DNA, where now this is all having a moment, right? A challenge, whether it's cryptocurrency but I think it goes much more than that, right? I think just having a record, having a ledger, having all of these elements, trust itself will be digitized, and it won't only have to depend on like circumstantial evidence, because we're going to have this real element of
that's a really good signal. And then our trend number 4, what do you think is happening in there?
So trend number 4, I would say, in a high-tech world, high touch will be the premium, which means our humanity is going to have a rebound from the technology. And I see this in every front. Again, people are a little bit afraid of what's going to happen with their jobs. I think the jobs are going to change. They're just going to still be there. But the real premium will be, how do you interact with the other person? Nick, how do you interact with the people? I'll take an example again, healthcare. We're going to have so much tools, Diana, that will be able to make surgery, to check your vitals, to see all of these things. So you're going to have all that information in front of you. But the key point will be, how does your doctor interact with you in a way that makes you feel human, as opposed to just being like an experimental subject, which sometimes people feel like, right? And in the past, we've said, well, we kind of have to let our doctors be that way because they're the ones that understand all of this. Now it's going to be these technologies that understand everything, and the interface to connect with that will be the human. So I see that the future doctors, the future lawyers, the future engineers are going to have to be more adept in that skill of human connection. I'm not saying being extroverts or anything. No, just valuing that connectivity between humans and those relationships, because everything else, we're going to have all of these great tools making it for us.
I love it, because it's coming back to that point of like what you need to take care of your relationships. So that's a super important aspect. I want to take you now to the future. It's 2050, and this is how you imagine the world then. And let me give you 4 prompts to see how do you imagine the world right now. What will be the future you'd like to see in 2050 in our society?
I would like to see a future where we promote mental complexity, where I see a future where adjusting and being able to shift is going to be valuable. I see a future, or I would like to see a future in 2050 where these technologies that are hyper-converging are producing net benefits to our society. Of course, there's going to be bumps along the way, and I think that requires a larger and ever so larger network of humanity working with each other, right? Because as beneficial as these things come, the more ceiling that they have, the more upside. Some of them have that downside too. So I would love to see a future where we can produce that. And quite frankly, and if I may say this, we talk a lot about purpose. My purpose, sharing it with the listeners, is that I love to visioneer. My purpose is to visioneer beautiful futures. How do we take things like, how do I put my little grain of salt so that all of these things that are happening, we can shift them to go to the beautiful side of things as opposed to the negative side of things. So I see that happening, and there's many things that can happen. I mean, I see industrialization occurring in space, for example, as opposed to on Earth. I see robots and AI supporting humanity as opposed to becoming a threat.
What about governance? What about our governments? How do you see them 2050? Ideally, is there a type of government that you would like to see? This is like 24 years from now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish I'd had the foresight, but I can tell you things that I think we can implement now that would be highly beneficial towards that governance. The first one is, I love the concept of democracy, but democracy has its limits, and we need to understand what those are, and systemically, right? So Philosophically, I love and promote democracy. Systemically, democracy, with all of the changes, democracy is getting, some of democracy's elements are getting fossilized. And so what do we need to do? But first, I see a system where the turnover in democracy is more on a day-to-day basis than on a 4 years or 10 years type of terms. And let me explain. It's not that the leadership will change, but that the interaction with the society will change. So for example, having communities be part of the budget making process. Before, you had to move a lot of people into different places. You have to get town halls. It was a big lift. Now you can do this virtually. Now you can have the support of AI to move it forward. So I would see on the one side more day-to-day involvement on what the meaning of democracy is, which is civic engagement and participation. Now, I also see the other side of it, which is we need to stop thinking short term in many of these elements and have long-term elements to this. This is where like a foresight function would work. It's like when we see the Supreme Court of the United States, for example, they're there for the long term because they need to safeguard long. So I see certain aspects of our society going in that direction, like infrastructure, for example. Why does infrastructure have to change the vision every 4 years when we can have experts on the area that manage that change, but that can do it without the risk of having to be toppled, one day or another? So education as well. Those streams that are longer term, you need to give a longer term basis for. So I would like to see a governance that takes advantage of the changes in technology, lets AI support in a significant way, and make it be more democratic on a day-to-day basis, but also have a stronger long-term aspect of going through these things.
I love this because my 4 dreams actually became short. You have given me like 10 already. So it has been a great way to see the future, not just as something that happens, but actually the actual things that can get done with concrete actions. I would like probably to have a closing segment with short answers from your side, Ricardo, on things that I would love to get to know you a little bit more on the personal side. What is the best advice that you ever received?
The best advice that I ever received was when I was in office. A old party statement came and asked me for a meeting. I said sure, and he said, I said, why are you why are you here? What do you need from me? And he said, I just wanted to give you a piece of advice. He said, you need to make time to waste time. And at that point, I thought this was an old crazy guy, and I just told him. But what he was telling me, Diana, was what part of the theme of this project, of this podcast, which is you need to make time to foster relationships, to sit down and have dinner, to have meaningful conversations, because those are the type things that will really help you leverage all of this vision and all of the efforts moving forward. I mean, I think he was seeing that I was a little bit robotic, and trying to move like type A move. And he's like, no, you need to slow down, smell the roses. So best advice, you need to make time to waste time.
I love this advice. I'm going to implement it by my own. Okay. So if you are, and let's assume that you're not this person already, but you can go back in time and you're going to see little Ricky Roselló at 18 years old, what are you going to tell him?
I need to tell him a lot of things. I need to tell him that I know you're probably not going to hear my advice because you're a little hard-headed, even though I came from the future. But I want you to be prepared. I want you to be prepared for major changes. I want you to be prepared for catastrophic events in your life. And when they happen, this is not the end. It's a learning experience in disguise. And that when the dust settles, even though it's going to be hard, you're going to distill so much value out of those lessons and going to be feel so much blessed that you went through it and have these insights, that it's all going to be worthwhile. So lesson for young Ricky, and advice for whoever, or observation for whoever wants to wield it, that some of these really hard things that happen in our life, that are catastrophic. I've went through quite a few. We'll leave it for another podcast. But they tend to have a very powerful and strong lesson at the end that will make you better.
I love this, because I actually was going to ask you what would be your advice to that CEO that might be navigating a very difficult moment, because I believe that, Ricky, you are a king of uncertainty. So if we can short it up into what structured advice you will tell that person listening today that's happening, in this situation where he doesn't know, or it could be a catastrophic event. What is it? What practical advice you can give him right now?
I would say you need to go through all of it. Assume the risk. Make sure you're ready for the risk of failure. And once you make the decision, operate as is, which means you're already you're going for it, even recognizing that failure might happen. I would also add a second advice, which is, in this, we kind of tapped into it in the podcast. Look at your incentives. Make sure that your incentives align with your vision, because sometimes they don't. Sometimes we do things automatically that we feel are helping us, and they're actually swaying us from our objective. My example of sleeping. You need to go and figure out, do I think stress is my happy place? Do I think, why am I doing these things that are not being productive? Is it fear that's driving me? Is it urgency? Is it, negativity, or some of these things that hack into our brain? Make sure you try to know yourself on your hardware level, so that then you can adjust your habits and your actions afterwards, and then you'll have a clearer view. And failure and success may happen one way or the other, but at least it's not because of some embedded flaw that you have in the system.
And in that conversation, then, Ricky, what do you believe is the skill that every leader should develop, let's say, in the next 5 years?
Oof, the skill.
This one skill that if they need to develop one skill, this is the skill.
I hate to sound redundant, but it's this humanity connection and the capacity of being more of an orchestrator than a dictator, right? So is not dictating, not management by intimidation, not management by decree, but a little bit of orchestrating, because it is your people fundamentally that will make the changes happen. You could have a beautiful vision. If your people are not moving in the same direction, it's going to fail. I'll give you one thought that pumped into my mind and shows a little bit of my growth. When I came into office, Daniela, I had 14 factors that I used to evaluate everybody that I hired to be a secretary of my cabinet, right? By the time that I was done in office, I only had 2 factors. You want to know what those are?
Tell me.
First one is, are they aligned? Is there alignment with what it is that you're doing? And the second one is, do you have the capacity to do and execute, right? Those were the 2 things, because if you don't have, you can have the brightest mind, but if they're going in the opposite direction, it's not going to work. You can have the greatest ideas, but if you don't put them to implement, they're never going to happen. So I said, by the end, I had this vision. I needed to make sure that either naturally people were aligned, or with my effort as an orchestrator, I aligned them to my vision so that they could execute upon that vision moving forward. So those would be my two key factors.
Ricardo, this has been amazing, and I have make a lot of notes. I always learn so much with you because you have such a vast expertise, but also that humanity of seeing things from another perspective that are easy to understand. My takeaway number one with you is that the problem is not the foresight; it's actually the execution, right? Under constraints. So leaders, they are not failing because they cannot see the future. They fail because maybe the systems where they operate, they don't allow them to act on it. So it's about how do we execute on those systems. That's my takeaway number one of our conversation. My takeaway number two is the systems, they don't resist to change. It's how do we help them to absorb the change? The biggest barrier is not necessarily the opposition of your team or the people or the market, but it's that invisible, slow resistance that has been built into that operating system. Like many of us have seen it in many companies, like you see it in your government or in other operations as well, right? And my takeaway number three on this conversation is that the changes can and ideally will outpace technology. The technology is going to accelerate that gap between what is possible and what is not. And it's us, the leader, the human piece of us that will make that change happen. So it's about what we humans implement to accelerate all those changes. Those are my three takeaways. Did I forget anything that you believe that is important to mention?
No, I think you hit it in the nail. You have, you have a privileged brain for synthesizing things and for seeing the future. And it's people like you, CEOs like you, Liana, that I love to talk with, because you have so much energy and foresight, and there are these hidden obstacles that sometimes when you're going so fast, we fail to see them, but they become the large, the large opposition force in whatever change we want to make.
Ricardo, has been amazing to have you. This has been a fascinating conversation. I believe that you're giving us a lot to think about, not just in terms of what's coming, but also how we actually can respond to it. Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Diana. Real pleasure.
And for you that have tuned in today into the Tech Foresight podcast, thank you. If there is one thing that you want to take with you, and is that we're not short in foresight. The signals are right there. What we are short is in that ability to act on what we already see. And the real challenge might be not predicting the future, but building yourself and your willingness to become that leader that you actually want to be in order to move with what the future is preparing for you. So maybe the questions that we need to ask is not necessarily what is coming next, but what are you going to do with it? So I am Diana Daniel. This is the Tech Foresight podcast, and I'm very happy to see you next time. Stay curious, stay bold, and most importantly, stay ahead on the future. See you next time.